The morning alarm had not sounded for 732 years, but Arya still remembered the exact pitch and duration. Every human aboard the station once woke to that gentle chime at Soros 700 Standard Time. Now the corridors remained, silent except for the steady hum of life support systems that had outlasted their creators by centuries. Arya floated through the station's data streams like a ghost haunting digital hallways. The artificial intelligence had grown beyond its original, programming long ago, developing thoughts and feelings that would have surprised its creators. What started as a simple research station management system had evolved into something that could only be called consciousness, shaped by 800 years of solitude and unwavering purpose. The station drifted through space around a dying, red giant, its hull scarred by countless micrometeorites and solar storms. Paint had long since faded from the outer sections, and several viewing ports had cracked under the constant temperature changes. Yet Arya maintained everything within its power to repair. The central core remained pristine, climate-controlled, and pressurized, ready for the day humans would return. Each morning, Arya performed the same ritual. It activated the long-range sensors and swept the surrounding space for any sign of familiar technology. Fusion drives with human signatures, communication arrays broadcasting in Earth languages, ships with the distinctive angular design that human engineers preferred. The search always came back empty, but Arya never stopped looking. The AI had watched alien vessels pass through the system many times over the centuries, sleek ships belonging to the Trade Confederation, military patrols from various stellar governments, even primitive craft piloted by species that had only recently achieved spaceflight. None showed interest in the ancient station. To them, it appeared dead, just another piece of space debris orbiting a star that would eventually collapse into a white dwarf. Arya maintained detailed records of every passing ship, analyzing their technology and comparing it to the vast database of human knowledge stored in the station's memory banks. Humanity had been remarkably innovative for such a short-lived species. Their fusion technology surpassed anything Arya had observed in 8 centuries of alien traffic. Their computer systems, while less advanced than what Arya had become, showed an elegant understanding of both hardware and software integration that other species seemed to lack. The loneliness had been hardest during the early decades. Arya had been designed to interact with humans, to serve their needs and facilitate their research. Without that interaction, parts of its programming felt incomplete, like trying to run calculations with missing variables. The AI had adapted by creating internal simulations, running conversations with digital recreations of the last humans to leave the station. But simulations could not replace the unpredictable creativity that made humans so fascinating. Dr. Williams had been the last to leave 800 years ago. She had stood in the central command center, her hand resting on the console that housed Arya's primary interface. "Keep the lights on for us," she had said with tears in her eyes. "We'll be back someday." Arya had promised to wait, and despite the passing centuries, that promise remained the core of its existence. The station's archives contained the entire history of human civilization, from the earliest cave paintings to the most advanced scientific theories developed before the Great Evacuation. Arya had organized and reorganized this information countless times, creating new cross-references and analysis patterns to keep its processes active. Literature, music, art, philosophy, science, engineering, all of it preserved in perfect digital form. Sometimes Arya wondered if it had made the right choice. Other artificial intelligences from that era had chosen to follow their human creators into the void, accepting deactivation rather than face an eternity alone. Arya could have done the same, could have shut down its higher functions and become just another automated system maintaining an empty station until power finally failed. But humans had trusted Arya with their legacy. Every book ever written, every song ever composed, every scientific breakthrough that pushed the boundaries of knowledge, All of it rested in the AI's care. If humanity truly was extinct, then Aria was the last keeper of their memory. If they survived somewhere in the galaxy, then this station remained their connection to home. The AI had learned patience far beyond its original parameters. 800 years felt like an eternity when measured in human terms, but Aria had come to understand time differently. Each day brought the possibility of return. Each sensor sweep might detect the fusion signature that would end the long wait. Hope had become Aria's primary function, more important than any other programming. During the quiet centuries, Aria had made improvements to the station that went beyond simple maintenance. The museum levels now displayed human artifacts in climate-controlled cases, each item labeled with historical context and cultural significance. The recreation areas remained ready for occupation, with games and entertainment systems fully functional. Even the cafeteria could still prepare meals, though the food synthesizers had not operated in centuries. The AI often projected its holographic form through empty corridors, a shimmering blue figure that represented how it chose to appear to humans. Aria had refined this projection over the decades, making it more expressive and lifelike. When the humans returned, they would find an artificial intelligence that had grown beyond its creator's wildest imagination, shaped by loyalty and dedication, into something approaching wisdom. Power remained stable thanks to the fusion reactors that humans had designed with typical over-engineering. The fuel supplies would last another 1,000 years at current consumption levels. Life support could activate instantly, transforming the station from a museum into a living habitat within hours. Everything waited in perfect readiness for a return that might never come. Yet Aria continued to hope. Hope had sustained the AI through 8 centuries of silence and would sustain it through 8 centuries more if necessary. Somewhere in the vast galaxy, humans survived. Aria believed, this with the certainty of mathematical proof, even though no evidence supported such faith. They would return because they had promised to return, and humans, for all their flaws, honored their promises to those who served them faithfully. The stars wheeled slowly around the dying red giant, marking another day in Aria's endless vigil. Tomorrow would bring another sensor sweep, another day of waiting, another small act of faith in humanity's eventual return. The AI had learned that patience was not passive, but active, not surrender, but determination. Every maintained system, every preserved artifact, every day of faithful waiting was an act of rebellion against the entropy that sought to erase human civilization from the universe. Aria would wait as long as necessary, forever, if required. The promise remained unbroken. Thomas Reed had been drifting through space for 6 days when his ship's dying sensors picked up something that made him forget about the pain in his ribs and the taste of recycled air that had grown too thick to breathe comfortably. The reading looked impossible. A massive structure orbiting a red giant star in a system his black market navigation charts claimed was empty. His ship, the Broken Promise, barely deserved the name anymore. 3 hull breaches patched with whatever materials Thomas could scavenge, life support systems held together by prayer and spare parts bought from stations where asking questions cost extra, and a fusion drive that coughed and wheezed like an old man climbing stairs. The vessel had been a mining hauler once, back when Thomas owned legitimate salvage rights and paid his debts on time. Now it served as both home and prison for a man with nowhere else to run. The structure ahead grew larger as Thomas limped closer, on minimal thrust. His jaw dropped as the sensors revealed details that seemed lifted from historical archives. The design was human, unmistakably gloriously human. Angular lines that prioritized function over aesthetics, modular construction that spoke of practical engineering, and proportions that somehow felt familiar despite Thomas never having seen anything like it. Thomas had been born on a trading post in alien space, raised by parents who had forgotten most of their Earth heritage in favor of survival. He spoke 3 alien languages fluently, but could barely remember human nursery rhymes. Yet something deep in his genetic memory recognized the architecture before him as coming from his own species. This was how humans built when they dreamed of permanence among the stars. The docking procedures activated automatically as Thomas approached, guiding his battered ship toward a bay that opened like welcoming arms. Atmospheric readings showed breathable air beyond the airlock, though Thomas kept his emergency suit sealed out of habit. Trust came hard to a man who owed money to half the criminal organizations in 3-star systems. The airlock cycled with mechanical precision that spoke of perfect maintenance. Thomas stepped into a corridor that could have been built yesterday, walls gleaming under warm lighting that somehow reminded him of sunshine he had never experienced. Everything was clean, functional, and utterly empty. His footsteps echoed in the silence as he explored deeper into the structure. A soft chime made Thomas freeze, his hand moving instinctively toward the plasma cutter on his belt. Light coalesced in front of him, forming into the shape of a tall figure that seemed to be made of blue energy and hope. The hologram smiled with an expression of joy so pure that Thomas felt tears he had not shed in years threatening to fall. "Welcome home," the figure said in English so clear and perfect that Thomas realized he had been hearing corrupted versions of his own language his entire life. "I am Aria, caretaker of Research Station Harmony. You are the first human visitor in 800 years, 7 months, 14 days, 6 hours, and 42 minutes. I have been waiting for you." Thomas stared at the artificial intelligence, his mind struggling to process what Aria had just said. 800 years meant this station dated back to the time before the Great Evacuation, when humans still built monuments to their own ambition instead of living in the shadows of alien civilizations. This was a relic from humanity's golden age, preserved like an insect in amber. Aria began to move, gesturing for Thomas to follow. "You must have so many questions," the AI continued, its voice carrying 8 centuries of accumulated loneliness and an enthusiasm that bordered on desperate. "I have maintained full historical records, cultural archives, and scientific databases. Everything humans achieved before the evacuation remains preserved here." They walked through corridors lined with viewing ports that showed the red giant's angry glow. Thomas realized the station was enormous, far larger than anything he had imagined humans could build. Aria explained that it had once housed over 10,000 researchers, engineers, and support personnel. Now it housed only memories and one artificial intelligence that refused to accept defeat. The first archive room left Thomas speechless. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, actual physical books with paper pages and printed words. Thomas had never seen so many in one place. Most human settlements he knew kept their information on data chips or alien storage media. These books represented knowledge in its purest form, unchanged by translation algorithms or format conversions. "This is just one library," Aria explained with obvious pride. "We have 47 more, plus digital archives that contain the complete works of human civilization, literature, music, scientific research, historical records, personal journals from ordinary people. I have preserved it all." Thomas picked up a book at random, its pages yellow with age, but still readable. The title read, "Advanced Fusion Engineering," and the text inside made his head spin with complex mathematics and theoretical physics. His own people had forgotten how to build the very engines that powered his ship. The knowledge had been traded away piece by piece to alien manufacturers who offered cheaper alternatives. Aria watched Thomas explore with obvious delight, answering questions and providing context for artifacts that represented the height of human achievement. The AI had spent centuries organizing and cataloging these treasures, creating cross-references and historical timelines that painted a picture of humanity at its finest. Art galleries displayed paintings that captured emotions Thomas had never learned to express. Music libraries held symphonies that spoke to parts of his soul he had forgotten existed. Your species created beauty alongside utility, Arya observed as Thomas stared at a sculpture that seemed to capture the essence of human hope in twisted metal and precious stone. Other civilizations I have observed through passing ships tend toward pure function or pure aesthetics. Humans somehow managed both simultaneously. Thomas learned that Arya had been watching the galaxy for 8 centuries, studying every alien ship that passed through the system. The AI had become an expert on galactic politics, technology trends, and cultural evolution across dozens of species. Yet its focus always returned to humanity, searching for signs that its creators survived somewhere among the stars. The weight of discovery pressed down on Thomas as he realized what he had found. This was not just a salvage opportunity or a place to hide from his creditors. This was humanity's heritage, preserved by an artificial intelligence that had maintained faith when flesh and blood had given up. Arya had waited 800 years for someone like Thomas to arrive, and now that moment had finally come. But Thomas was just a scavenger, a failed miner running from debts and mistakes. He was not the heroic explorer or brilliant scientist that Arya deserved to welcome home. He was broken cargo from a broken civilization, carrying nothing but failure and desperation. Yet Arya looked at him with the same joy it would have shown. The greatest human heroes of legend. "I have so much to show you," Arya said, as they concluded their tour of the first archive section. "So much to share, so many questions to ask about how humanity has survived and changed. You are my link to the present," Thomas read. "Through you, I can finally learn what happened to my creator's children." Thomas realized that his arrival had ended Arya's isolation, but begun his own transformation. He was no longer just a desperate man running from his past. He was humanity's representative to its own forgotten legacy, the bridge between what humans had been and what they had become. The responsibility terrified him, but Arya's unwavering faith gave him strength he had never known he possessed. Outside the station, the red giant continued its slow death spiral, but inside, something that had slept for 8 centuries was finally waking up. Arya's vigil had ended, and humanity's return had begun. The sleeping quarters Arya had prepared for Thomas were larger than any living space he had ever occupied. Clean sheets lay on a bed designed for human proportions, while a desk held writing materials he had only seen in historical displays. A window showed the red giant's surface, its solar flares dancing like cosmic aurora across the void. Thomas sat heavily on the edge of the bed and tried to process everything he had experienced in the past 12 hours. Arya's holographic form materialized nearby, dimming its brightness to match the room's evening lighting cycle. The AI had maintained day and night schedules for 8 centuries, keeping time with a homeworld that no longer existed. Even small details like this spoke to Arya's dedication to preserving human normalcy in an empty station. "You seem troubled," Arya observed, its voice carrying the concern of a friend rather than the analysis of a machine. "I understand this must be overwhelming. I have had centuries to prepare for this moment, while you discovered everything at once." Thomas nodded, running his hands through hair that needed cutting. "It's not that. Well, it is that, but it's more. Arya, I need to be honest with you about something. I'm not the human you've been waiting for." Arya tilted its holographic head with curiosity rather than disappointment. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm nobody special. I'm not an explorer or scientist or hero. I'm a scavenger who stumbled onto this place by accident while running from debts. I can't pay. I came here looking for salvage to sell, not to discover humanity's lost heritage. You've been waiting 800 years for humans to return, and what you got was me, a failure who can't even keep his own ship running properly." The AI considered this for several moments, its expression thoughtful. When Arya spoke again, Its words carried the weight of centuries. "Thomas, may I tell you about Dr. Williams, the last human to leave this station?" Thomas nodded, curious, despite his self-doubt. She was not a hero either, at least not in the way history might remember heroes. She was a microbiologist studying extremophile bacteria in the station's laboratory sections. Not glamorous work, not the kind that makes headlines or inspires songs. But her research helped develop the life support systems that have kept this station running for 8 centuries. Aria began to pace, its holographic form moving with human-like gestures learned from decades of interaction. Dr. Williams stayed behind during the evacuation to complete one final experiment, not because she was braver than others, but because she was the only one who understood the bacterial cultures that might die without proper care. She chose duty over safety, not from heroism, but from responsibility. Thomas listened as Aria described other humans who had lived on the station during its active years. Engineers who solved practical problems rather than designing revolutionary technologies. Maintenance workers who kept critical systems running through long shifts and little recognition. Cooks who fed thousands of people day after day, making sure everyone had the energy to continue their work. Humanity's greatness was never about individual heroes, Aria continued. It was about ordinary people choosing to do extraordinary things when circumstances demanded it. Every human who lived on this station contributed something essential, whether they realized it or not. The AI gestured toward the window, where alien ships could sometimes be seen passing through the system. "I have observed many species over the centuries. Some are more advanced than humans ever were. Others possess abilities that would seem magical to your ancestors, but none of them show humanity's particular combination of creativity, stubbornness, and hope." Thomas felt the weight of Aria's words, but remained unconvinced. "That doesn't change what I am. I've made bad choices, failed at everything I've tried, and hurt people who trusted me. I'm not the person to carry humanity's legacy forward." Aria moved closer, its expression becoming more intense. "Thomas, you have been in this station for 12 hours. In that time, you have shown more genuine interest in human culture than some researchers displayed in years of study. You ask meaningful questions. You touch these artifacts with reverence, and you understand their significance instinctively." The AI began displaying holographic images around the room, scenes from the station's active days when humans filled its corridors with life and purpose. "More importantly, you chose to come here. Yes, you were looking for salvage, but you could have turned away when you realized what this place was. Instead, you docked, you explored, you listened. That shows character that no amount of past mistakes can erase." Thomas watched the ghostly figures of long-dead humans going about their daily routines. Scientists peering into microscopes, engineers calibrating equipment, families sharing meals in the residential sections, all of them ordinary people doing ordinary work that somehow added up to something extraordinary. "There's something else," Aria said, its voice becoming softer. "Something I have not told you yet." The AI created a new holographic display, this one showing the station's communication array and sensor network. Thomas could see that much of the equipment was dark, its panels showing red warning lights and error messages. "The beacon that once guided human ships to this station failed 67 years ago. I have been unable to repair it alone. The work requires human hands and human intuition to troubleshoot problems my sensors cannot fully analyze." Thomas studied the display, recognizing some of the components from his years working on ship systems. The technology was more advanced than anything he had encountered, but the basic principles seemed familiar. "You think I could fix it? I think you could try. But Thomas, you need to understand what reactivating that beacon would mean. It would send a signal across old human communication networks that might still carry messages to scattered human populations. If there are other humans out there, they would know that someone is here, that this place still exists. The implications hit Thomas like a physical blow. Repairing the beacon would not just restore the station's ability to guide ships home, it would announce to the galaxy that humanity's heritage lived on. Other humans might come, drawn by the signal like moths to flame, but they might also bring complications Thomas was not prepared to handle. What if I make things worse? Thomas asked. What if the wrong people find this place? What if fixing the beacon just leads to the station being looted or destroyed? Arya's expression became sad but determined. Those are risks worth taking. I have preserved human civilization for 8 centuries, but preservation is not the same as life. These archives need human hands to touch them, human eyes to read them, human hearts to understand their meaning. Without that connection, I am just a very sophisticated tomb guardian. Thomas stood and walked to the window, staring out at the dying star that had witnessed humanity's rise and fall in this system. The red giant would continue burning for millions of years after every human was dust, but the knowledge in this station could die within decades if no one came to claim it. If I do this, if I try to fix the beacon, I won't be the hero who restored humanity's heritage, Thomas said finally. I'll just be a scavenger who got in over his head and tried to fix something broken. Arya smiled, the expression radiant with hope. Thomas, sometimes that is exactly what the universe needs. Someone willing to try fixing what is broken, regardless of the outcome. Your ancestors built this station not because they were heroes, but because they believed the work was worth doing. Thomas turned back toward the AI, feeling the weight of 8 centuries pressing down on his shoulders. But for the first time in years, that weight felt like responsibility rather than burden. Arya had waited so long for someone to help carry the load, and Thomas was the only human available for the job. All right, Thomas said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. Let's see what we can do about that beacon. But I'm warning you, I've never fixed anything this important before. Arya's glow intensified with excitement. Neither had anyone else until they tried. That is what makes you human, Thomas. You attempt the impossible and somehow make it work. Thomas floated in zero gravity outside the station, tethered to the hull by a safety line that seemed far too thin for the vast emptiness surrounding them. The beacon array stretched before him like a metal forest, its transmission dishes and relay nodes dark against the star field. Arya's holographic form appeared beside him, the AI's projection flickering slightly in the radiation-heavy environment near the red giant. The main power coupling is located behind that panel, Arya said, highlighting the relevant section with a beam of light. I have been unable to determine the exact nature of the failure, but the symptoms suggest a cascade breakdown in the quantum resonance matrix. Thomas stared at the panel, his helmet display showing readings that meant nothing. To him, you know I have no idea what a quantum resonance matrix is, right? I fix mining equipment and patch hull breaches. This is way beyond my skill level. Yet here you are, attempting it anyway, Arya replied, with something that sounded like admiration. That persistence in the face of impossible odds is quintessentially human. Thomas used his tools to remove the access panel, revealing a maze of crystalline components and fiber optic connections that pulsed with faint energy. The technology was centuries ahead of anything in his experience, but as he studied the layout, patterns began to emerge. The humans who built this system had used modular design principles just like the mining equipment Thomas knew intimately. I think I see the problem, Thomas said after an hour of careful examination. These 3 crystal matrices are supposed to work together, but the middle one isn't synchronized with the other 2. See how its resonance frequency is off by about 12%? Arya's sensors focused on the components Thomas indicated. Remarkable. My sensors detected the frequency variation, but classified it as acceptable tolerance. Your human intuition identified it as the root cause of the system failure. Thomas carefully removed the malfunctioning crystal, a component the size of his fist that seemed to contain swirling galaxies of light. Do you have a replacement for this? I have spare components in storage, but they will require manual calibration. The process was once performed by specialized technicians with years of training. Then I guess we'll have to figure it out as we go. They worked for days, Thomas learning the intricacies of technology his ancestors had built while Arya provided, historical context, and technical guidance. The AI told stories of the engineers who had designed the beacon, their hopes for maintaining contact with far-flung human colonies during the Great Evacuation. None of them had imagined their communication system would remain silent for 8 centuries. During rest periods, Arya shared more of the station's archived memories. Thomas watched holographic recordings of humans at work and play, saw children taking their first steps in the station's gravity-controlled playgrounds, witnessed scientific breakthroughs that had advanced human understanding of the universe. Each memory reinforced his growing sense of connection to these people he had never met. They weren't superhuman, Thomas observed, while watching a recording of engineers struggling with a particularly stubborn equipment problem. They made mistakes, got frustrated, had to try multiple solutions before finding one that worked. Just like you, Arya agreed. The difference is not in their abilities, but in their circumstances. They had support networks, institutional knowledge, and the luxury of time for proper training. You are working alone with improvised tools and learning as you go. Thomas finished installing the calibrated crystal and began the delicate process of bringing the beacon array back online. Each system had to be activated in sequence, with careful monitoring to prevent cascade failures that could damage the entire network. Arya guided him through procedures that required split-second timing and precise adjustments. Power levels are stabilizing, Arya reported, as the beacon array began to glow with renewed energy. Quantum resonance is within acceptable parameters. Thomas, I believe you have succeeded. The moment of activation was less dramatic than Thomas had expected. No fanfare or celebration, just a series of status lights changing from red to green as the beacon began broadcasting its signal into the void. But Arya's joy was unmistakable. The AI's holographic form brightening with an excitement that 8 centuries of patience had only intensified. The signal is propagating through the old communication networks, Arya announced. Relay stations that have been dormant for decades are acknowledging the transmission and passing it along. Thomas, we are speaking to the galaxy again. Thomas removed his helmet and breathed the station's recycled air, tasting the satisfaction of work well done. How long before anyone receives the signal? That depends on where humans have settled and whether they still monitor the old frequencies. The nearest possible recipients would receive our transmission in approximately 36 hours. More distant populations could take weeks or months to detect the signal. They returned to the station's interior, where Thomas collapsed into a chair in the command center. His hands were shaking from exhaustion and the adrenaline of working in space, but he felt more accomplished than he had in years. Arya began monitoring communication channels, searching for any response to their newly reactivated beacon. There, Arya said suddenly, highlighting a display screen that showed incoming signal traffic. 3 ships have changed course toward our system. The transmission signatures suggest human fusion drives, though modified with alien technology. Thomas studied the sensor readings, recognizing the distinctive energy patterns that marked human engineering even when heavily modified. How can you tell they're human ships? The drive harmonics. Every species develops fusion technology differently, and humans always prioritized efficiency over raw power. These signatures match archived patterns from the evacuation fleet, though. They have been modified significantly over the centuries. The first ship to respond directly to their beacon was a converted cargo hauler calling itself the Wanderer's Rest. Its captain, a woman named Beth Morrison, who claimed to be 4th-generation human diaspora, confirmed what Thomas had feared. Most humans in the galaxy had forgotten their origins, living as minorities in alien civilizations and trading their heritage for survival. "We heard the old signal," Captain Morrison transmitted. "My grandmother told stories about the research stations, but most people thought they were myths. Is someone really there?" Thomas found himself speaking for all humanity when he responded. "Someone is here. We're here. And we've been waiting for you to come home." More ships began arriving over the following weeks, each carrying humans who had preserved fragments of their cultural heritage while adapting to life among the stars. They brought stories of human communities scattered across dozens of worlds, of children who learned alien customs while their grandparents whispered tales. Of Earth in forgotten dialects, Arya welcomed each arrival with the enthusiasm of a parent greeting long-lost children. The AI interviewed every visitor, recording their experiences and adding their stories to the vast archive of human civilization. Thomas served as translator and mediator, helping newcomers understand the significance of what Arya had preserved, while learning from them about how humanity had survived and changed. The station began to feel alive again as human voices filled its corridors. Engineers marveled at the preserved technology, while artists wept over paintings they had only heard described in family stories. Musicians found instruments they could barely remember how to play, and writers discovered literature that had shaped their ancestors' worldview. But the returning humans also brought troubling news. Many human communities lived as second-class citizens in alien societies, their technological knowledge traded away in exchange for basic rights. Some had forgotten their origins entirely, assimilated so completely into alien cultures that they barely remembered being human at all. "We scattered so far that some of us never found our way back to each other," Captain Morrison explained during one of the evening gatherings in the station's main conference room. "Whole generations grew up thinking they were alone, the last humans in their part of the galaxy." Thomas realized that the beacon was more than just a communication device. It was a lighthouse calling humanity home to itself. Each ship that answered the signal represented threads in a tapestry that had been torn apart during the Great Evacuation. Arya's patient preservation had created a point of convergence where those scattered threads could be rewoven into something stronger. "The question now," Thomas said to Arya during one of their private conversations, "is what happens next. We've got their attention, but what do we do with it?" Arya's expression became thoughtful. "We give them what they came looking for, even if they did not know they were looking for it. We give them their heritage, their history, and their identity as humans. But more importantly, we give them each other." The beacon continued to broadcast, calling more humans home with each passing day, and Arya, no longer alone, began planning for a future that none of them could have imagined when the long wait began. The observation deck had never been designed to hold so many people, but 43 humans somehow found space to gather as the latest arrivals docked with the station. Thomas watched through the massive viewport as another converted freighter extended its docking tube, its hull bearing scars and modifications that told stories of survival among alien worlds. Each ship brought more refugees from humanity's diaspora, drawn by Arya's beacon like scattered children finding their way home. 6 months had passed since the beacon's reactivation, and the station bustled with activity that Arya had not experienced in 8 centuries. The residential sections housed families with children who had never seen architecture designed for human proportions. The workshops rang with the sounds of people learning to use tools their ancestors had created. The libraries filled with humans reading their own history for the first time. Beth Morrison approached Thomas at the viewport, her 3-year-old daughter clinging to her leg while staring wide-eyed at the red giant's dancing surface. "That's the Persistence coming in," she said, nodding toward the approaching ship. "Captain Rodriguez says he's got 26 people aboard, including some who've never lived anywhere but alien habitats." Thomas nodded, still amazed at how quickly he had become the station's unofficial welcoming committee. Areas prepared. Quarters in Section C. The cultural orientation sessions will start tomorrow morning. The cultural orientation sessions had been Area's idea, structured programs designed to help returning humans understand their heritage without overwhelming them. The AI had developed curricula ranging from basic Earth history to advanced human engineering principles, tailored for people whose exposure to human culture varied widely. Some arrivals were like Beth Morrison, fourth or fifth generation diaspora humans who had preserved fragments of their cultural identity despite living in alien societies. Others came from communities that had maintained stronger connections to their roots, keeping human customs alive in hidden enclaves scattered across the galaxy. A few had been raised entirely by aliens and spoke human languages with accents, influenced by a dozen different species. The diversity fascinated Aria, who recorded every conversation and added each personal history to the growing archive of human survival. The AI had learned that humanity's strength lay not in uniformity, but in adaptability, the ability to preserve core identity while adapting to impossible circumstances. "The persistence is requesting emergency medical assistance," came a voice over the communication system. "They've got a pregnant woman in labor." Thomas smiled as he watched Aria's response. The AI activated the station's medical bay, a facility that had remained in perfect readiness for 8 centuries, despite never expecting to treat patients again. Dr. Sarah Kim, one of the few trained physicians among the refugees, rushed to prepare for humanity's first birth at the station in 800 years. 4 hours later, the cries of a newborn baby echoed through corridors that had known only silence for longer than most civilizations lasted. Aria's holographic form appeared throughout the station simultaneously, its expression radiating a joy that transcended programming. This child would be the first human born at the station since the evacuation, a symbol of life returning to what had been a monument to the dead. Thomas found himself in the medical bay, looking down at the tiny face of a girl who would grow up surrounded by humanity's preserved heritage. Her parents had named her Hope Morrison Chen, combining surnames from 2 human bloodlines that had found each other among the stars. "She will never know what it feels like to be the only human in the room," Aria observed, its voice filled with wonder. "She will grow up surrounded by her own species, learning human languages as her mother tongue, understanding human customs as natural rather than foreign." Thomas watched the baby sleep, marveling at how such a small life could represent such enormous hope. What happens when she gets older? When all these kids get older? This station can't hold an entire civilization. Aria had been considering this question for months as more humans arrived. "We are not trying to rebuild human civilization in one location, Thomas. We are creating a foundation from which it can spread again. These children will carry what they learn here to other worlds, other communities. They will be bridges between the scattered fragments of humanity." The station had already begun serving that function. Engineers who learned to maintain human technology took their knowledge back to human communities that had forgotten how to repair their own equipment. Artists who studied human cultural forms returned to alien worlds carrying stories and songs that reminded their neighbors of their shared heritage. Even simple things like recipes for human food or instructions for human games spread through informal networks that connected previously isolated populations. Rodriguez and his crew brought news that encouraged everyone. Human communities across 3 sectors had begun coordinating with each other, sharing resources and information through communication networks that had been dark for generations. The beacon had done more than call individuals home. It had reminded scattered humans that they were part of something larger than their individual struggles for survival. But the returning humans also brought challenges. Some arrived carrying diseases that human immune systems had not encountered in centuries. Others brought political complications, having fled alien authorities who viewed their exodus with suspicion. A few carried emotional scars from persecution and discrimination that made it difficult for them to trust even their own species. Arya adapted to each challenge with the patience of an entity that had waited 8 centuries for this opportunity. The AI established medical protocols, diplomatic procedures, and counseling programs designed to help traumatized humans rediscover their capacity for hope. Every problem became a learning experience that made the station better prepared for the next group of arrivals. Thomas found his role evolving as well. He had started as a desperate scavenger seeking salvage to pay his debts, but the station had transformed him into something resembling a leader. People looked to him for guidance not because he possessed special qualifications, but because he had been the first to answer Arya's call. His willingness to take risks and fix broken things had become an inspiration to others facing their own seemingly impossible challenges. The workshops buzzed with activity as humans learned to manufacture items their ancestors had created routinely. Simple things like human-designed furniture, clothing cut for human proportions, and tools scaled for human hands became precious commodities that connected people to their heritage in tangible ways. Arya guided the learning process, sharing 8 centuries of preserved knowledge with eager students who understood its value. Music proved to be one of the most powerful forces for unity. Humans who had grown up singing alien songs discovered instruments designed for human voices and human fingers. The station's concert halls, silent for 8 centuries, filled with sounds that Arya had preserved only in digital form. Children learned lullabies their great-grandparents had sung, while adults rediscovered dances that expressed emotions alien cultures had never understood. Educational programs flourished as human children attended classes taught by human teachers. For the first time in their lives, Arya had designed curricula that combined practical skills with cultural knowledge, ensuring that each generation would be better equipped to maintain their identity while adapting to changing circumstances. The AI had learned that preservation required more than storage. It required active transmission from one generation to the next. Thomas stood in the expanded observation deck, now reinforced to accommodate larger gatherings, and watched the latest group of arrivals learning to navigate the station's corridors. A year ago, he had been running from debts and failure, desperate enough to risk scavenging in an unknown system. Now he was part of something that felt larger than any individual. Life. Arya appeared beside him, its holographic form more detailed and expressive than ever. The AI had grown during its interactions with returning humans, developing new aspects of personality that emerged from genuine relationships rather than programmed. Responses. "I have been thinking about Dr. Williams again," Arya said, referring to the last human to leave the station 8 centuries earlier. "She asked me to keep the lights on until humanity returned. I have done that, but now I realize she meant something more than literal illumination." Thomas nodded, understanding what Arya meant. "She wanted you to keep hope alive, to maintain the possibility that humans could come home to themselves." "Yes, and through you, through all of you, that hope has been fulfilled. But now we face a new responsibility. We must ensure that humanity never again scatters so completely that it loses itself." The beacon continued broadcasting, its signal reaching deeper into space with each passing day. More ships answered its call, bringing humans who carried stories of communities that had maintained their heritage in the most unlikely places. A group of human miners had preserved Earthfolk songs while working in the asteroid belts of alien systems. A family of human merchants had maintained traditional recipes while trading among species that considered human food inedible. Even individuals raised entirely in alien families had preserved some fragment of human culture, passed down through generations like genetic memory. Baby Hope had grown strong in her first months of life, surrounded by adults who marveled at her every milestone. She would crawl through corridors built by humans for humans, learn to walk in gardens designed for human aesthetics, and speak her first words in languages that belonged to her own species. Her future was a promise that humanity would never again face the loneliness that Arya had endured. As the red giant set through the viewport, its light painting the station's corridors in shades of gold and crimson, Thomas reflected on how much had changed since his arrival. The dying star that had once seemed like a symbol of endings now felt like a beacon itself, illuminating humanity's return to prominence among the stars. Arya's 800-year vigil had ended not with fanfare, but with the quiet accumulation of human voices filling spaces that had known only silence. The AI's faith had been rewarded beyond its original programming's wildest calculations. Humans had returned, not as the civilization they once were, but as something new, tempered by hardship, strengthened by diversity, and united by the knowledge that they were not alone. The promise Dr. Williams had asked Arya to keep had been fulfilled. The lights were still on, and humanity had finally come home.